Oop. Okay, our next speaker, as Justin introduced, is Martina Beck from the BC Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. And your timekeeper is going to be back there.
Good.
And here's your clicker.
Awesome, thank you. All right, well, thank you very much for having me here today. And I'm gonna try to blast through a whole bunch of information. I don't wanna be the person at the start of the day that takes us over time. I know we have a very jam-packed agenda today, and I wanna make sure I don't cause us to run out of time. So yeah, I wanted to talk about our BC Interministry Invasive Species Working Group, which is functions actually quite similar to the Washington Invasive Species Council, in that essentially the Interministry Working Group is, or IMISWIG is what I'm going to call it for the rest of the talk, is essentially trying to bring together the provincial, all the different provincial ministries that are on the land and on the ground managing invasive species. And so really that's to ensure that there is coordination, collaboration, bringing together those different mandates as well as different expertise across those different ministries to ensure there's coordination around all the different invasive species files. Folks in the room may know Val Miller and Crystal Chapburn, who are the chair and vice chair and are really a powerhouse, I would say, on the invasive plant program up in British Columbia. Unfortunately, they couldn't make it here today, but we're hopeful to be able to attend. But they've certainly, Val has been involved with this group since it was first established in 2004. And these are the different ministries that are the main participants of the working group. And we also have some sort of ad hoc members that join, such as folks from the Royal BC Museum that really bring subject matter expertise on identification of species. And across these different ministries, there's cross linkages. For example, our invasive mussel program that I'll be talking about later today has had a very strong relationship with our Ministry of Transportation around signage and roadside inspection stations. So those have been some great linkages there. For example, our Ministry of Agriculture has been leading the Japanese beetle response, which I know there'll be a talk later today about that as well. So that's where some of those kind of cross sort of synergies across these different groups exist. And in 2004, the Interministry Group came out with a number of plans. So we have our strategic plan, as well as we have our two rapid response plans, one for general invasive species and then one rapid response plan specific to invasive mussels. And in terms of sort of the results to date of this group, as I mentioned, it's just a lot of sort of sharing of resources and expertise and ensuring that there's basically coordination when it comes to response for invasive species. Also coordination of different risk assessments of species. We've had sort of our risk assessment template as part of our EDR process. It's sort of been more long established for invasive plants, but starting to build that up for invasive animals as well, both terrestrial and aquatic. In terms of the sort of evolution through this interministry group, we've had the leading of our early detection rapid response program, and that really started largely with plants, but is now expanding to more invasive animals as well, an example being, of course, the invasive mussels. And essentially it was sort of a development of a series of plans that, again, started with a bit more of a scope of invasive plants, and there were some national invasive species plans that came out sort of in the mid-2000s, and that sort of helped to sort of be a guiding point for our provincial plans as well. And in terms of the scope of what's included under our rapid response plans, similar to the Washington Invasive Species Council, it's focusing on those new and emerging threat species and can be across any jurisdiction, but doesn't include those species that may already be well established. So really looking at trying to get at those species early on and when they're first detected. And basically looking at, kind of our key steps of our early detection rapid response process. And it shows them in a kind of linear process, but really there can be steps that happen at sort of at the same time. So, while an identification of a species is occurring, we may also be, of course, trying to contain it very early on. So there can be steps that are happening sequentially at the same time. And these are kind of the main steps that form our rapid response plans. And just some examples of some EDR species and responses. These are just examples of some new invaders and threats that aren't yet found in BC, and ones that we have basically are on the lookout for. And then we also have some species that are those that have been confirmed, some more recently than others. Again, Japanese beetle will be talked about a little bit later. Spartina is one. The intertidal cordgrass, I think, is also familiar for folks here in Washington, where there's been eradication work happening on that. Treatments happening since 2014 and are continuing to really try to bring those populations down. And those treatments have been quite successful. The probably most recent detection is a new species of crayfish, likely believed to be the red swamp crayfish, which was just found last year in an isolated pond right near the Vancouver airport. So I'm going to be looking at what steps we can take, because that's a new species detection in BC, which of course we don't like to see. Some specific responses just to show examples of, and there's through our sort of forest pest group, of course, the work on gypsy moth, and there's been the response for Japanese beetle. And another one, again, that's going to be talked about later today, BC's also been very active on the white nose syndrome since the detection on the West Coast, and really just trying to work to do surveillance and monitoring. It's been a very collaborative effort. The province has been working with the Wildlife Conservation Society, the BC Community Bat Program, and working sort of as an active group to do surveillance and monitoring of bat populations, and also trying to get reporting and information out there as well. And just some kind of lessons learned that we've had through our EDR program is really trying to get the tools in place to enable rapid response. So that comes with having some of those shelf-ready products to actually be able to make the step of having the tools to eradicate. So there's obviously the initial detection, but also having the tools to be able to effectively go out and do rapid response. So that's sometimes been a challenge, but is an area that we're continuing to kind of try to pursue, because for some species, there's more tools available than others. And just wanted to quickly touch on some priority species and pathways. Talked a little bit about some of the kind of emerging threats, and these species here are a combination of some that are either not yet present, such as the invasive mussels, zebra and quagga mussels, others that are already present, but we're trying to prevent further spread. So species like smallmouth bass and yellow perch are ones that we're trying to prevent new introductions from occurring. And others in some areas are more of a concern than others. Northern pike, I know, is certainly of top of mind here in Washington. Species that is native actually in our northern parts of the province, but in the lower Columbia River, where they've been, are obviously outside of their native range, is a priority to continue that suppression work. So a range, and of course comes with it all the priority pathways to try and target preventing those species from getting into BC. So I think most of these are pathways that folks here in the room are familiar with, and that's where there's a lot of shared coordination and lots of partnerships, working closely. Been at meetings and working with Justin and a few others in the room for a number of years through groups such as the Columbia River Basin Rapid Response Plan for mussels, and there's also the Pacific Northwest Economic Region, PENMOR, that also provides great opportunity for coordination around invasive species. Lots of partnerships within BC, so we work very closely with the Invasive Species Council of BC. Sue's going to be talking later today about some great the outreach education efforts and also working closely with a lot of our regional invasive species committees. I think there's a few folks here in the room as well. And so partnerships, I can't speak enough about all the great partnerships. That's really critical. And I think, events like today and allows to even further expand some of those. So we have, as I mentioned, our provincial ones, as well as our cross-border ones. And just wanted to finish off by mentioning our reporting information. So Justin was just showing me the nice shiny app that they have. We also have one in BC for reporting all invasives. We have a plant-specific one, and we're actually just in the process of building a new provincial database. So we're hopeful that that'll sort of be all-encompassing for all invasives. So I think I'm out of time, so I will leave it at that.